You work in an organization which probably has a certain picture or a certain image of itself in mind, and probably you have a picture and image of that exact same organization in mind. And the question is, are both of these pictures congruent? What the organization says and what it actually delivers on is not always the same. And the question is, how is it possible that sometimes the idea, the expectation, the concept, the aspiration of organization and the reality has very little to do with each other? So what is the portrayal of an organization? What is the factual evidence? And why often is there such a delta in between? And there are many examples where between aspiration, idea, concept, and what you expect of yourself as an organization is not what is properly delivered. A typical example is sport. There are many sports teams. We recently again had it in Germany. The German women's football team during World Cup lost. No, well, they won one game, they lost one game, and the draw on the last game means they left the tournament at the group stage, just as the men's team did. The main difference was that the women admitted what went wrong. They said they didn't play very well, and they also took accountability, unlike the male team, which is also in their pro sport wildly overpaid. So when we talk about what's happened, by the way, if there are any German listeners on this podcast, please refrain from making comments which I immediately heard just yesterday, that Germany is world leading in sports, world leading in this, world leading in that. You still coast off on the picture, and that's exactly what we're talking about. You coast off on the picture of Germany being the leading force for basically anything, efficient and very effective. We are obsessed with efficiency, productivity, very hardworking, etc., etc. And in reality, so in sports, FIFA World Ranking, Germany, I think, is now ranked 15 or 16, so far away from top 10. And when you look into digitization, other aspects, Germany's far away from being world leading. And when I visited Germany just for Hamburg Pride recently this weekend, I can tell you that with all the travels before, I had everything in digital currency, meaning I pay by card in Swiss franc or in British pound. And as soon as I went just into Germany, 38 minutes later, and said, oh, sorry, no card acceptance, or just card acceptance from 10 euros or more. And immediately I had to use cash. It is the typical German thing to be a bit backwards in many different aspects. So this is exactly what we're talking about. When we talk about what is the expectation, the aspiration, and reality, why are there so many differences, such a difficult and big gap often between these two? And by the way, just breaking in the news, KPMG again is accused of billing for hours that never happened. McKinsey already paid more than $500 million for settling a court case towards the opioid scandal, which they promoted or played a major part of, obviously. Otherwise, they wouldn't pay that sum of money in the US. And Deloitte now was mentioned in one article as the most sued company. You see, all these companies have worldwide reputations. And as soon as we have the transparency looking at the data, it is not as great as it was known. So what do you have to look at when you want to have a better organization? Three main aspects. Aspect number one, organizational. So the first thing you do is you examine what is the situation in which you are right now. A work situation examination. And that's exactly what I did, for example, at my first employer after uni. They did it frequently and very professionally to not have this delta so wide that actually your own people say, well, what this company claims is not the reality. I also saw it at the University of Hamburg when I was studying there. It wasn't done too well there, I have to say. And when you then see, after this work situation examination, when you see what do people actually see in the organization, what is the reality, then you have to talk about what do different people expect from each other. And that is a top-down and bottom-up process. So you have to talk about what do top levels expect from lower levels in the hierarchical pyramid and vice versa. And there will be a delta in between these two. And this delta now has to be addressed. You have to close this delta as much as possible, close the gap as much as possible. And by the way, when there is no gap, there are two options. Either you are one of these organizations where leaders do excellent work and people really love to work there. And I have a couple of clients where I will definitely say that their delta, their gap is not very wide. However, also take into account external data. Look on platforms like Kununu, which is for evaluating employers, or Glassdoor.com, as most internationals will know. And you see what people write there. And of course, I immediately know that leaders will say, oh, only the frustrated post there. Sometimes they do, but often there are people who really have substantiated criticism that has not been addressed for years, and you're just angry about that they have a platform now to put into the transparent world out there where people can now refer to if they want to work for you or not. So step number 1 is the organizational aspect. Step number 2 is the personal aspect. So first, you have to ask yourself, what do you expect from yourself at work? And also, what do others expect from you at work? And of course, rightfully so, you will now say, well, it's not only about work and life. Absolutely. So now you also have to ask yourself, what is it that you expect from yourself in life, and what do others expect from you in life? When you answer these 2 questions, and now you have to ask yourself, what is the fulfillment ratio? So between expectations from others and by yourself, what do you expect from yourself? What do others expect from you in life and in business? When you say all fulfilled, very good. Most people will not say that everything is fulfilled. And then you can still implement steps. However, and now there's a very important aspect here, which is the main difference between the organizational level and the personal level. On the organizational level, you can change almost anything as long as it doesn't go against regulation, regulatory compliance, or laws. However, there are certain factors in your life which you cannot change, either because you do not want to change them. So, for example, when you decided not to work more than 30 hours per week, there are certain aspects that you cannot change, at least not very quickly. And I also give you an example. When you, for example, say, hey, I am working 25 hours per week and I want to do a bit of university, but not more than 30 hours in total. When you work 5 hours per week on university, your studies might take longer. That is something you don't want to change, and then please face the consequences from it. However, there are certain aspects that you cannot change. And I know that now motivational speakers, again, as they did in the last week already, went wildly against me. There are certain aspects that you cannot change. So, for example, your skin color, your gender identity, your sexual orientation. These are aspects that you cannot change even if you try to. And of course, now immediately motivational speakers or people who have no clue about scientific evidence will say, oh, we all know there are certain levels of discrimination there. You just have to ignore them. When you deliver and you're a good employee, you will receive return on your invest. Utter nonsense in countless organizations. There is open discrimination. We have to face the aspect that in certain places you will be less valued and you receive less for exactly the same work that you do. So now it is very important that you see which factors can you change, which factors are unable to change, because either you don't want to change them or you cannot change them, and they have to be taken into account. From there, you do you put in place a step-by-step plan, and please have 3 versions of it. Best case, which means everything went perfectly well. Worst case, which means everything went really bad, but you still complete what you have in mind. And the managed case in between, if you now wonder why do we need 3 versions, because you do not know what's going to happen in the future. Climate crisis, global pandemic, anything else that might happen in your life which you do not expect will have an impact on your planning. And when you only do best case planning, you will be frustrated very quickly because you feel like a failure, and you're not. When you plan properly, it prevents poor performance. Maybe you heard of the P, prior planning prevents poor performance. The prior planning prevents poor performance, the 5 important P of planning. I know this sounds horribly German, however, it works. From a leadership point of view, you now have to see what are the different aspects that you have here. So first, who are the people who are leading? And that's the third aspect now. Who are the people who are leading in your organization, and how much did they earn their position? Are these people who worked their way up, or were these people who simply were born to the right family? And of course, they can't change that. It's not their fault. However, just because they were born in the right family that owns the company or the organization does not mean they have to be respected for who they are. You have to earn your leadership position. And the question is, how much social legitimization for your leaders is there? The lower, the worse. And of course, some people were born into a family and they are brilliant leaders. Unfortunately, many are not, because they were never proper leader. And is your company actually giving a path to people who work their way up? And now a very important question is, are there leaders in your organization who lead by ego, by look at me, by sociopathic or psychopathic behavior? Are there people who actually need this? Because then your organization is in deep trouble. People who serve the organization are the best ones. When you are in the game just for ego, look at me, or any kind of other sometimes even from a mental health point of view, aspects that need to receive proper treatment, and you probably even need to behave like that, then you harm the organization. Who are the people? And that's the main question here. Who are the people who simply deliver and contribute with understatement and just deliver on the promise? Are these people given a voice? Are these people recognized? Are these people seen? Do these people get the promotion? Or is it that you have insider deals and pseudo networks? You call them network because network sounds way nicer than I know someone, and I prefer to pick people just randomly. Are there people who get a career which they have not deserved in the first place? And I know this question can be painful in your organization. I know this might lead to situations which are very uncomfortable. However, when you do not give people a return on their investment, I give you an example of myself. I come from a background where invest into the business, into the organization, paid off very well due to brilliant leaders. I studied teaching. Besides that, I worked at GlaxoSmithKline, a pharmaceutical company. They saw that I have a certain talent, or they thought I have, and they afterwards offered me a lot of work. Excellent work, where I learned a lot. I transitioned into the IT because when I paid for myself for IT training, which my employer did not pay back then, I don't want to blame them. It wasn't part of my role, especially the trainer aspects, etc. However, these people invested in my role in the pharmaceutical world. The IT role I invested in myself, and then someone at this company, that was New Horizons, the largest partner of Microsoft for learning solutions. And this company then saw there is a certain talent with this person. I think we should work with that person. And then they invested in me and gave me a career path up to international leading level. I received awards with, etc., due to people saying someone invested in the first place, and here is your return. Does this exist in your organization? Because when you have people who with their understatement, that's what we call it. Understatement means just deliver, don't put your ego first. And by the way, when people call it personal branding, to put their ego and look at me attitude first, that's not personal branding. That's sociopathy or psychopathy or both. And when people receive a return on invest, you will always get more than you invested in the first place. And by the way, when you have people who need to put their ego first, who need the look at me, who need their ego be shown in the organization, I can simply quote Dr. Keltner, who's a psychologist, a professor at University of California, Berkeley, a top 25 university worldwide, who said, and I quote, "The need for external validation is the path to being not happy." These people will not be happy, and neither will your organization, because these people always need more ego, more look at me, more applause. They need it again and again and again. It's basically an addiction. And this will immediately rub off on other people, their work, their leadership style, and this will give your organization a really bad reputation in the market. And when you now look into these three aspects, organizational, personal, and leadership, OPL, organizational, personal, and leadership style, you at least have to deliver pretty well on these three, because if not, you become the victim of your own bad behavior. And by the way, no, it's not young people being too demanding or no one wants to work anymore or all of that nonsense. It is simply you not meeting the expectation. When the aspiration, the idea, the concept, the picture you have in mind that you want to portray to the outside world and to the inside, to your people, if that does not match reality, it is your fault and no one else's. Look into the organizational aspect, look into the personal aspect, which I mentioned, and the leadership style aspect. And as soon as you only remotely deliver pretty well on these, the situation will immediately improve. And of course, there's more to that. I published about this. And if you now, by the way, have some aspect where you say, hey, I really need to ask a couple of questions to you, I really have some question marks here, and I really see that we basically are not doing very well, or you think you do pretty well, but you want to become better, or whatever else, just send me an email, nb@nb-networks.com. If you need something very specific, a training session, speaking, coaching, just drop me a line there as well. However, if you just want to have a discussion with me, just drop me an email, nb@nb-networks.com. Doesn't cost you a penny. The email is also mentioned in the show notes of the show, and then we can take it from there. Also, that's the second aspect, which I always recommend. Register for the so-called leadership letter, because we have live sessions in place where you can ask live questions. So when you go to expert.nb-networks.com, then you can ask only Every Wednesday morning, you receive one email. It's 100% content, ad-free guarantee. Everything I publish is there, free access, so there's no paywall, nothing. And also you see the dates and how you can access the live sessions that we have. expert.nb-networks.com. That link is also mentioned in the show notes of this podcast. And the third aspect is the most important one. Apply what you heard in this podcast, because only when you apply what you heard, you will see the positive aspects coming from it that you obviously want to apply in your organization. I wish you all the best doing this. Let me know if I can be of any help. Always happy to help you. And at the end of this podcast, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.